and users need to be able to add comments or 5-star ratings to those artworks, and that information stays in Drupal. The artwork itself stays in the remote system. I run into that all the time, and kind of being able to get there was one of the goals for the data API. I don't know that we're quite there yet. In theory, it might be possible. I haven't tried yet. But for that, potentially, yes, it does get into loading a read-only object, searching against, finding all artworks that users on this site have rated 3 or above becomes disturbing to do. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, but this doesn't quite get to the API, right?
You don't have to beat your head against the wall. You can't do it. So
that specific example, I could. It just takes multiple steps.
Exactly.
Which actually leads to another point. When I've done this stuff before, I've usually come to the conclusion of searches should never pull back data. They should only pull back IDs.
Right.
Loading is a completely separate step. Right. Search, get back IDs, and then multi-load those IDs. Makes life so much easier than trying to search and pull back at the same time.
Yeah.
Yes, there's performance hit for that sometimes, but it makes the code so much nicer to separate those phases.
Indeed, I already have a cross-database view backend on Drupal.org, and this is exactly what it does. That the search part of the view pulls in IDs, and then it goes to separate databases to get back the pieces of data based on those IDs. So it's completely, yes, that's what we should do. That's absolutely what we should do.
Well, I mean, one of the big problems with views in the beginning, right, that it did this sort of thing of it had to node load everything in each row instead of pulling back the table rows you needed. So
only for certain fields where it can't get the data directly. So for node, if you're showing the full node version or teaser version, it does that.
Yes, right. I guess the table case is the one I'm talking about. We want to avoid a node load for each row.
Node loads are not exclusive. Yeah.
Because you can multi them now.
Yeah.
You can multi them and cache them.
And you can put in memcache, and we're already doing that. But if you use the entity cache, you can't deal with conditions because you can't have cache keys with conditions, and you can't know what's in your cache. So we absolutely need to stop people trying to pull data in one big chunk. Because if you just have a light query and then just pull the memcache, it's always going to be better than putting all that data across. I think
it's true.
Can we do anything with lazy loading, or is?
Well, wait, let's get back to the APIs though, because this is behind the APIs. Yeah. Let's just stay as I want to interface. My code is interfacing through while I'm loading something. Like when I load something, so it sounds like you're saying I'm defining an entity which is partly lives in some remote storage, partly lives in Drupal. Therefore, I always need additional hooks to build the full object.
Yeah. So what pretty much we came down to is that what we want from this unified API is to have some sort of queries, and the queries should return IDs, and we should have a load operation which takes IDs again, and the two should not mix. The two should be separate. The two should be totally separate, especially because they can live in different storage systems.
Okay, so right.
These are two fundamental APIs, and then of course this was pretty much what we call the read part, and it splits into query and load.
Okay.
Faster about that. So, do you always need to? Is the load always a full load, or are there lightweight loads? So, for example, the entity URI function.
What was Catch saying is that you always want to do a full load, and the reason for that is that if you want performance, then your full objects are going to be in memcache anyway. So there is no point in trying to pull less.
Because you have to duplicate that. You have to duplicate that query next time you go for a different amount of information.
That's only if you're in an environment where you have memcache available. All those people that Derek was talking about who are running older versions of Drupal that they haven't upgraded because they don't remember to, are on shared hosts where they don't have memcache available, they don't have MongoDB available.
Database cache too.
But they don't need speed either.
Right.
They don't need it. They don't need it as much.
They need it
They need it less.
They may not need to scale as far.
Yes, but
they still need to page to respond in less
the
than
same
4
is true
seconds.
for database caching. when you are database caching, you are using MySQL as a key value store, very much the same as you would use memcache. You have a cache ID and you have your loaded object, you have the object to load as one blob. So there is not really a point in trying to load smaller chunks when you already have that thing collected. So you run you can run one query against your key value store, no matter how that key value store is implemented.
How well does that work with multi-load?
Really well. It's one multi-load is one query already.
Yeah.
So
I mean, if you load, nodes 5, 7, 12, and 19, 2 of those are already cached, 2 of those aren't.
Yeah.
Is that smartly taken care of?
The 2 for caching one query and it will fetch the rest.
Okay. Then do we want to say part of the unified entity API for everything should be cacheability? Just,
Yes.
Don't make entities that aren't cacheable.
Well, so though that gets back then to something like menu links, where whether or not, well, I mean, maybe this is a rendering issue. I mean, sometimes stuff is cached, but how it's rendered depends on the user, or whether the user can even.
Well, rendering is a separate cache layer.
It is. Yeah, those two cache layers should really be treated.
I want to talk about just the data objects themselves.
I think that there is a problem though that at the moment we let people do all kinds of shit in notebooks. And we like do things that we're using for language in notebooks and then those happens in caches.
I think one thing
we have to stop that.
One thing we're going to have to accept is that in order to really advance some of these APIs, we're going to have to break stuff and tell people, no, you can't do that anymore. We do that all the time, but we're going to have to really, hook node load may have to go away in favor of you write a field for it, which means that the field API needs to be dead simple to do that with. And it's not there yet.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah. So about menu link, once again, you have a query which fetches which menu links you see, and then you fetch the menu links,
Sure.
and this way.
I'm sorry, the first query is returning the IDs?
Yeah, the idea is
Just making sure
First,
we're on.
yes, the first one, this is what we have discussed already, that your query returns which IDs you see, and then you get your menu links, which menu links the user has a chance to see based on that query, and then the next step, which is again a totally separate step, you render them. So for example, if you have a title callback, then you run it on only in this tab. So this is really 3 very separate steps, which we don't really separate nicely out in menu.
Right, I was going to say, I mean, the problem there is that first query is how we structure them in terms of their depth also and things like that. So it would, I mean, it's doable the way you suggest, but it would mean moving a lot of logic around.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right now, what menu does is pretty much the very example of what we should not do. I can criticize menu. So
That one's not half as funny without in the background.
I'm writing this down.
because the menu tree queries load all sorts of data. It loads all the IDs. It loads the menu link data. It loads the menu router data instead of having this nicely separated steps. On the other hand, we only came to this realization that we need to separate out like now when we began to use 7. So it's not a real big deal that in 6 we have written these queries that way and others were doing also wrong. We didn't know. We now know, and we are going to make 8 a lot better this way. So
We're at about the halfway mark, time-wise, I think. So do we want to keep going on this or switch topics?
Well, so let's see. I mean, the other. The general conclusion is that yes, we want a unified API, right? It sounds like Drupal 7. There's a distinction: fieldable versus not fieldable. Is that kind of? Do you think we would keep that in Drupal 8 as kind of at least 2 sort of the base class might not be fieldable.